Great. Welcome, everyone, from right now, at least sunny California. I'm still kind of waiting to see that who stole our season this time. Looks like we are wet and cold, and actually I'm even occasionally looking snow on the mountain here. So I am sure that East Coast people have actually stolen our season over here. So good morning from California. I have, my name is Hetal Sheth, and on behalf of SOPAC, I actually have a pleasure of welcoming two very passionate speakers. Michael Brescher, who's ex-chief executive officer at Boys to Men Tucson in Arizona. And now he actually just stepped to a new role as a consultant at Brescher Coaching. And Mariah Harvey, she is a director of Healthy Intergenerational Masculinity Initiative. I'm sure there are lots of questions, Mariah, that people have actually been asking me, what does it entail and what does it mean? And actually, it seems like you will be decoding that today. So to introduce Mariah first, I think that she spearheaded this HIM initiative from its inception, what I understand. She joined Michael's team, I think sometimes summer of last year, and quickly grasped the importance of this impact-driven impact strategy that we were building together. And also kind of being very instrumental in selecting the right metrics. How can we kind of continuously measure the performance of their program, and became all the way to the instrumental of releasing their first impact report in December 2022. So together we kind of worked, and I think we kind of saw that Maria's passion for not only the space and the data was super match for SOPAC. We are very happy to kind of see that she brings not only the passion for data, she also brings a very expansive knowledge of this gender equity space. And we will see that and hear her today, and you will be the judge of that. I'm also welcoming warmly Michael. And Michael, I think we met even more than a couple of years ago now that I can think of. Michael has played various roles actually, even in past before he came to Boys to Men. Just like Maria, I think I see that both of you kind of been playing this role for, it's not something that you started spearheading just from one organization to other, but I see that you have a deep history of that. Michael, actually, I see that you have a huge experience from working with organizations on domestic violence, as well as some environmental learning camp things. So our team actually worked with a team of Boys to Men, and now it's HIM initiative for a number of years. And then we actually going to see that how this Boys to Men kind of brings this unique concept. When we first engaged, Michael, I think I must say that this was a new concept to me, that being a woman and even raised a boy, we always just thought that there is so much that we need to do to supporting women and empowering them and to prevent gender-based violence. But you brought a complete different a concept or a thought process to the table, which I think I was, I admit that I was not quite aware of that we need two to tango. And I think we need kind of like, tackle this issue from multiple sides. We are very, very honored to have both of you today. For today's agenda, I will encourage everyone to kind of drop their question and answers to the Q&A, and then we'll try to kind of tackle them largely at the end of the session. And in the very beginning, I'll like to welcome Unmesh to kind of tell a little bit about how SOPAC works with organizations like Boys to Men, and then the floor will be open to Mariah and Michael. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Hetal. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So to get started, thank you so much, Michael, for trusting in SOPAC. When we started 1.5 years ago, we had no idea about your thirst to learn about your programs and the knowledge that you can discover through the stakeholder voice, essentially. I think that the journey of the Boys to Men when we started was all about essentially understanding what are the core challenges that some of the youths are going through, but that program has evolved, and I would love to learn more on some mechanics of that one altogether. When we get started, typically, I'd like to quick introduce everybody to bring everybody on a same page, because what Michael and Maria is going to go through is much more of a analysis process altogether. But before analysis, you need some plumbing. And I'll probably quickly remind, although many of you who are attending SOPEC webinar, you are familiar with some of them, I will give a very super fast level of rundown of how we engage in the five-phase process altogether. It's a very, based on 7 years of experience, it has become much more refined now than ever before. And we'll also share some very exciting work with you so that you can also start experimenting those things in your own work altogether. So the 5 steps are essentially what we say is that data strategy, which is extremely important, because what we see is that most organizations are stuck here, essentially. Most people don't really ask right, effective questions. They don't have a high quality logic model. In case of Michael, he had already had somebody from Jane come in and build that strategy, theory change for them. But ultimately that evolved over the period of time. And it's very important to evolve and continue to collect the right data. Even their data collection, there was a lot of learning that some of the data were effective and some of them were not. And so it's a journey essentially. So, and then next thing comes in is obviously data collection, data integration, which means bringing data from multiple sources, can maybe from Salesforce, maybe from Excel, from Google Spreadsheet or SOPEC survey, and so on, and ultimately giving you more of an insight. So, and again, this is super high level, so don't worry about it. I think that we have lots of past webinar on websites. You can come and see them on how the details of this thing. So our goal of this particular session is not to go into details of it at all, but remind you people that there are 5 steps required to measure and manage the impact. So the first thing is to design the data strategy. And to that extent, I have a very exciting announcement. We have this new app that we are building, and we're continuing to integrate. Essentially, the core aspect of it is we want to really simplify the journey through for impact, data, and actionability, the dashboard, the planning through this app altogether. You're welcome to note down this URL and log in and sign up. And we'll still be introducing AI-based process to instantly validate your strategy, which is logic model based. Ultimately, you already have starting 100 plus examples that you can start with it all together. So go and use those examples and personalize for your own need. More important thing is to align with your data and your dashboard thinking right away before you want to start this thing. So this is our 7 years of experience that given to you in a very short period of time. And ultimately, biggest value you're going to see is the collaboration that you can do with the multiple stakeholders. And that feature is coming soon. The second aspect is the data collection. Data collection is very critical and complex, essentially. And even before you collect the data, asking effective data is even more important altogether. And so we have our own SOPEC survey, although we can make more than 100 plus survey tools. This particular tool is offline, online. You can schedule a survey. More importantly, it's a multi-channel survey, essentially, and it's completely integrated with our data intelligence platform altogether. So that's the second phase. Third phase is to bring data from multiple sources. Could be SurveyMonkey, SOPEC survey, Google Spreadsheet, Salesforce, and ultimately designing the dashboard, which is what we did for HIM initiatives altogether. Key thing to remember that this process is not a linear process. It's an iterative process. It's not a waterfall-based approach. It's an iterative. So oftentimes you will realize, oh my God, this data does not tell me the whole story. And that sometimes happens essentially, and that you shouldn't be disheartened with it. The key thing is to make it short and simple altogether and fast. But make sure you think about all the right, effective, qualitative and quantitative things that you want to ask upfront so that you can learn from it and repeat as many times as possible. There is no perfect answer to some of the kind of complex challenges that we have. Obviously, ultimately, you can create your own dashboard. And by the way, we'll be sharing this presentation with you so you can click on those dashboards and see for yourself. You can even see the report that the him initiatives. It's an amazing report, and Maria will give some glimpse of it, but you can download it and see it for yourself. We also have many other examples of reports also. You're welcome to try, see, depending on a background, whether you're a charity, whether you're a housing organization, whether you are impact funds, you can use this kind of examples altogether. The key thing is that SOPAC has been working with relentlessly in a very passionate way with hundreds of social enterprise nonprofits through likes of Audible, Miller Centers, and the Fair Trade and Food for Poor and so on. So we really are thankful for this great support from the clients, and we look forward to continuing our journey. Most important thing, this is the most important announcement I want to make before I invite Maria and Michael. We are announcing a boot camp, so look out for this announcement in your email, and feel free to sign up. And it's a very actionable. So if you know us, we are very much about actionability. We are not in a just teaching you something and go away. This is really where you can build the strategy, you can build the direction and the dashboard within a very short period of time. It's amazing services to people who have cash trap but really want to move fast forward your journey. Come and join us. So please look out for this thing. And with that, I would like to thank all of you and also invite Maria and Michael to the presenting their findings from the program altogether.
Hey everybody, my name is Mariah, I use she, they pronouns, and I'm super grateful to be here. Working with SOPAC has been so pivotal to getting our work into the community and moving from this kind of impact cloud model with this theoretical data into the hands of actual community members that benefit from this work, as well as funders. So I wanted to just take an opportunity to just praise SOPAC for helping us get really concise with the ways we use data to service community. And just grateful for working with you all to just rearrange and reassess the ways that we use collective impact models for data retention. So Michael's going to start us off with just setting the foundation. We have a lot of information and not a lot of time, but that's life. Just setting the foundations to how we got into this work. He was a primary facilitator in getting this grant through, and also has done a lot of the networking for the collaborative cross-sector initiatives that we are working in right now. So I wanted to have Michael set the foundation, and then I'm going to do just a quick analysis of our impact report, which, as Unmesh mentioned, it's available. Download it. It's a PDF. You can get it on our website too, which will drop at the end of the presentation. It's really comprehensive and super readable. A part of our work was making it accessible to community. That became a really critical piece for us in doing social impact work. So I'm going to let Michael introduce the foundations of this work, and then I'll get into a really exciting data analysis of the work that we conducted with SOPAC over the last year.
Right on. Thank you, Mariah. So my name is Michael Brasher, and I'm just so grateful, so excited to be able to share a little bit about our impact learning journey with you this morning. And as Mariah said, really my intention here is to just provide context about what we're doing and really how we came to be here working on this healthy intergenerational masculinity project. And it is a mouthful, and it can be like, okay, what is that really all about? I know sometimes language of masculinity can be alienating to folks. And so we really want to make it simple what we're talking about. And so this presentation is about replacing cycles of harm with cycles of support for this systems change initiative. So I want to give y'all a little bit of background on this initiative and how it came to be. So a number of years ago, I was working at the Emerge Center Against Domestic Abuse, which is the primary domestic violence agency here in Southern Arizona. And really the seeds for this initiative and for this community movement really started when the women of color who are leaders in that organization begin to experience a shift in how they were thinking about how we as a community can best respond to support women and children who are experiencing domestic violence, which in the United States and here in Arizona, it is prolific. It's extreme what is going on every day in our communities. The number of families who are being made homeless, dealing with intergenerational trauma, really because of a severe climate of men's violence that, as we see it, we're really not doing enough about. And so what happened was these folks at Emerge, they were rolling out innovative programming, really piloting best practices in the country, securing funding to try to support survivors who are trying to leave terrifying situations oftentimes. And what they began to realize is the more they built out their programming, they were only ever receiving more phone calls from women in danger. They were only ever needing more beds for these folks. And so they began to wonder, what would it take to harness the will of our community to try to organize to actually decrease the amount of calls for help we're getting, right? What would it look like to really engage in prevention approaches to gender-based violence? And if you talk to a lot of survivors, what they're going to tell you a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, is I don't want my partner to go to jail. I don't want to leave this person. I love them. I want the violence to stop. Right. And a lot of times our community responses aren't prepared to deal with men in that kind of way. We're prepared to send him to jail. We're prepared to tell her to leave. But that's really, it's like when all you have is a hammer, everything is a nail. And that really doesn't match up a lot of times to what families in our community need. And we also know that the criminal justice system has disproportionately impacted communities of color, right? And so we were looking for solutions that aren't rooted in the criminal justice system, which is its own system of violence for a lot of folks. And so this group of women at Emerge, they launched this pilot experimental men's education program. I was working at our domestic violence shelter there at the time, and I had a chance to go through that original pilot. And it's still going today. It's a really radical program. It's a 26-week program, and you have men in there. They're there 2 hours a week together, and you have men who are on probation for domestic violence. You have men who have never been arrested, who are just there maybe because they want to learn. Or because their partner gave them an ultimatum. In other words, you have men from all walks of life. And we came together and we began to have these incredibly vulnerable conversations to deconstruct our own experiences of the socialization process of being a man. And what we found collectively is that a lot of us had experienced our own tremendous kinds of violence. Right? That a lot of men who use violence are also survivors of violence. And the question is, why do we replicate those systems? And what would it take to interrupt that cycle? And we thought that men might be hesitant to engage in this conversation. And to the contrary, we found that men were tremendously relieved to have a place to open up, to be honest about how they were feeling, to talk about their shame, to talk about how can we stop? What would my life be like if I felt safe, right? And we're doing this great work with men, and inevitably the best work you'll do with a grown adult man, a man who's trying to deal with his violence, will lead to this point over and over again, where he says, I'm so grateful that I'm having this conversation now, but why didn't anybody have this conversation with me when I was younger? Right. And it's a heartbreaking moment, but it's an insightful moment for us as a community to say, like, okay, what would it take then to be able to do that? And so I want to talk a little bit, zooming out here, more on this socialization process of boys and men, right? What happens to young people, young children, right? Babies, toddlers going into this process to where now I'm perpetrating terrifying violence within my own family system. I'm being really hurtful. How do we get from point A to point B, at least in the US context and in our context in Southern Arizona? So the scholar and advocate Bell Hooks, she said that the way that we raise boys in America is actually a question of child abuse. So what's that mean? Let's unpack it. This system of raising and socializing people into this gender binary that we have in the United States. These ideas, this is what a real man does, this is what a real man never does, right? When a man does this, I feel comfortable and confident. When a man does this, I feel uncomfortable, right? These are all these oftentimes unspoken norms, rules, ideas about how to be a gendered person in an appropriate way. And so when Bell Hooks says that the way we socialize boys into masculinity, those ideas about being a man, is a question of child abuse, what she's really talking about is that process whereby we get young people to disidentify from emotions, from grief, from empathy, from things that have been in this cultural context associated with weakness. And so she wrote, within that system, the first act of violence that's demanded of boys and men is not violence against women, and it's not violence against each other. It is violence against the self, right? What she described as psychic acts of self-mutilation, which is just when we come at little boys 3 and 4 years old and say, why are you crying? You're acting like a girl. Hey, big boys don't cry. And we do all of that to this one section of the population. We train them to relate to their emotions in a specific kind of way. And from a public health standpoint, when you socialize a whole portion of the population to relate to grief, sadness, and pain in a trivializing manner, there's a really natural outcome on the other side about how they're going to react to other people's pain, right? And that was my experience as a man being socialized in America. By the time I was in my 20s, I found myself absolutely terrified to identify with and validate pain in myself and in others. And so this program was really healing for me. And something that Bell Hooks writes in that is that if we're not successful in emotionally disabling ourselves in these ways, we can count on other men and boys to complete that process for us through homophobia, through humiliation, through bullying, through taunting. And so, of course, we know this system of gender socialization, then it's impacted by other systems of power like white supremacy, like colonialism, like ableism. And so then when we begin to look at young men of color, boys of color in our community in Arizona, which is a border town with intergenerational trauma, lots of Native folks, intergenerational trauma of colonialism. And it's, I can't express my feelings because of homophobia over here, but I also can't appear these ways because of white supremacy over here. We find that they are in such a confined, difficult, I would say impossible situation. And as a community, it's on us to organize ourselves to give them better and different alternatives. And so at that point, we really began to examine as a community in this movement, the community accountability model of men's violence. And I'm going to share that with y'all. So this is a big heck of a graphic. I'll kind of break it down for you. And it's really based on, it's a social ecological model of men's violence against women. And, taking an ecological approach when you're thinking about systems change is critical, right? And just to use the example, if I'm planting a garden in my yard and I have a tomato plant over here and season after season, I keep planting and it's not bearing fruit, it would be foolish of me to pull up that plant and say, what's wrong with you? Why can't you get it together? You have a problem, plant, right? Like obviously it's something in the soil conditions, the water quality, the sunlight quality, the air. There's all of these environmental factors that suggest to me that the production of fruit, whatever it is actually, it's being responsive to its environmental conditions, right? That's ecological thinking about problems. And so we begin to look at this ecological model of men's violence against women. And what it does, it helps us to break out of focusing on individual men and their bad behavior, right? And to understand that all of us who are men in the US and in this context are socialized in a particular way. We all have a role within this system, and that when men are using violence against women in our community, they're not misbehaving. They're not acting out, right? But they're really responding to the system of incentives, rewards, and punishment that our cultural values, political practices with one another are prescribing to them, right? And so if we look at that individual circle here, the smallest circle, we see that individual, and what they're doing is they're living out privilege in their relationships. They're maybe using controlling behavior, and maybe they're using socially acceptable controlling behavior, but they're acting out within the system they've been socialized into. So we take a step out and we say, well, where are they learning that? How are they learning that? And we look at that primary community, right? And the primary community, it's maybe my parents, other places where I begin to see, you know, in my household growing up, who does what kinds of jobs in my household, right? Who talks about what kinds of things, whose emotions count, who expresses what kinds of emotions in my household. I'm learning all of these kinds of things, right? It's the punishments I'm getting about crying. It's also the ways, the types of things that are said to femme or little girls versus little boys, right? Like, oh, look, he's got all of these girlfriends. You know, from an early age, 3- and 4-year-old boys are being lifted up for how they access women, right? And it's all these little subtle values that are going in to young people. And we might step back out and then think about, what are the container for that group? You know, faith communities, schools, how is this reinforced in the school systems? And civic groups, social service agencies. And so just to kind of put a bow on this model, it helps us to realize that it's not really about holding individuals accountable, but more we got to hold communities accountable. As communities, we must become accountable, right? And so what this model really became for us was a map for systems change. It's a map for intervention. And we began to think, all right, what are the different inputs we would need to create at each of these different levels? What are different inputs here in Southern Arizona where we could stage multi-level interventions to create a context in which the norms and the values around gender and masculinity in Southern Arizona are different from what is dominant a lot of times in the United States, where boys are having men model behaviors and relationships and capacities for them that lead to much healthier outcomes that are relational, that are caring. And so that's really a big part of what our work has been here. So to get a little bit more into it, I'm not going to go over our entire planning grant here with y'all, but we received a 1-year planning grant from the David and Laura Lovell Foundation, who have been amazing supporters of this whole project. They have a huge vision for engaging men and boys in violence prevention against women and in gender equity work. And so we spent a whole year doing pretty comprehensive and in-depth research about the state of and need for healthy intergenerational masculinity initiative in Southern Arizona. We did a ton of listening to diverse sets of stakeholders through the University of Arizona. They conducted the research for us. And we really found ultimately that the conditions for such an initiative were just right. That we were really poised to do this work in a great way. So we put together an entire proposal and strategic plan that was precisely around those recommendations. So I'm just going to go over quickly the scope of our work of the initiative. It really has 3 critical elements, and there's more that we're doing beyond this, but most of it falls into these groupings. First, it was to scale and increase program accessibility to boys, and we're centering Black and Brown boys in this initiative, Black and Brown community, all across Pima County. So Boys to Men was the organization that I've been the CEO of for a number of years that really helped launch this initiative. And at Boys to Men, they use a talking circle model where we train adult men to go to schools and to go to the juvenile justice system and to sit in weekly talking circles with teenage boys. And they practice vulnerability, they practice emotional intelligence, validation, encouragement. And it's really a radically different type of container where they can get what they need from older men and they're getting positive inputs. And so we've been scaling that, looking where can we bring this to youth who aren't in school. Where can we bring it to vulnerable youth who would really benefit from it? And so that would just, and there's allied programs that are like that we're also just trying to increase accessibility to. The second major task was to radically increase BIPOC adult male stakeholders. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, and men of color. And just to say briefly, in mentorship programs all across the United States, we have a problem where 80% of their volunteers and mentors are older white men, right? And not that they older white men don't have anything to offer, but if we ask why is that in the United States, it's because who has wealth and therefore time to be able to volunteer and sit in a school circle, for example, at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, right? And we're mostly serving youth of color, right? And so we really wanted to make a shift to say the knowledge, the wisdom, the lived experience of men of color in this community is so critical. It is so important. And the boys need it. They are dying to get it. And so we've been looking at issues of compensation and access and training, and that's a really radical, aggressive part of our agenda. And the third part is policy change. So what are the policies in the school system and in juvenile justice that really exacerbate harm and issues of toxic masculinity amongst teenage boys? What are the processes for dealing with trauma, basically, right? Behavior issues in school are usually trauma that actually harm these boys and decrease the odds they'll be vulnerable, ask for help, open up, etc. So we're working at a policy level too. I'm wrapping up so fast so I can give this over to Mariah. So we just hit 1 year in. Definitely would love for folks to take a look at the impact report that we created with SOPAC. And our main tasks have been scaling our allied programs. We've launched a community fund where we're giving away micro grants to grassroots organizations and individuals who want to pilot creative solutions in their own neighborhood, community, or social context. It's so exciting. It's really been an amazing thing to see how we're actually nurturing this work in the community and building the community's capacity. We have a youth leadership council, which is a group of young men of color who we're training up in their leadership, and they're also providing oversight, accountability to the initiative. We're working with our largest school district on some pretty significant policy interventions and how we're dealing with a lot of what have traditionally been called problem kids in the school system. We're working on a pilot program this spring where we're bringing together men who are on probation and system involved with teenage boys who are on probation and system involved, and creating weekly talking circles. It's really exciting. There's more I could talk about. I won't. And I'm going to hand it over to Mariah to talk a little bit about our learnings so far from our data on this journey. Thank y'all.
Thanks so much, Michael. And definitely that sets the framework for the ways that we use assessment data to really bring in an awareness about these concepts, specifically in identifying our input resources. So SOPAC has been so helpful in using this theory of change model. Michael, you can go to the next slide. This theory of change model that was identified by our stakeholders, which requires this ecological approach to men's violence, as Michael mentioned. It's not just having this, abstract analysis of these siloed experiences of violence. They're all connected in this really interconnected set of belief systems and ideological frameworks and internalized behaviors about violence. And that's not individual. We have to step away from the hyper individualism that the US really uplifts. It's a connected set of belief systems, and that requires us to have a network of interventions for both healing work, but also for accountability work. So here's a theory of change model that we used when developing our strategic impact approach with SOPAC. As you see, we identified our input resources. As Michael mentioned, there's some professional services involved, including folks that work in the realms of gender-based violence. We work at an Emerge Center Against Domestic Abuse. We also work with Goodwill Youth Re-Engagement Centers of Southern Arizona. They're a community support network for masculine identified folks. A large demographic that they support are folks that are experiencing houselessness, and also folks that have transitional housing. So this means that we're also bringing in issues of class support systems and accessibility and resource. So when we're working with SOPAC to really identify these input resources, it means that we are having to look at into year 2 of the initiative, scaling into larger policy assessment. It's not just looking at these circles and convening with the data that we're getting there, that rich testimonial and attendance data, but it's also scaling it out into what global implications are affecting these boys and men ability to show up in these spaces. What does psychological harm look like? What does resource harm look like? What does violence in the schools due to their psychological disposition when they come to these circles? So it's required a multi-tiered approach with this impact management system that I'm going to get into our interventions on the next slide. So Michael mentioned some of these, and also Mesh mentioned some of our cloud metrics that we're using with SOPAC's data, but it's really about using this micro approach to engaging with really rich qualitative data, including baseline, longitudinal data, Likert scale. That's like low stakes interventions with when these boys are in circle with their qualified mentors, they're having discussions about things that are really heavy and really personal. And so how are we using journals or data collection in circles that don't also inhibit the ability of folks to show up authentically, right? Because what we've seen a lot in data retention is if we have these external assessors come in and try to, provide this assessment data or get a collection happening, it's really impersonal, and it creates a wall for folks that are engaging with usually very traumatic information or personal testimony. So one of the ways that we've engaged with these cloud metrics are the mentors who are trusted within those circles conduct participatory data with the boys that are in the circles and in the community events. So if we're not just working in the school-based systems, the school-based sites, we're also doing community work. So we send like pre and post surveys to get rich baseline and longitudinal data of how people are interfering or intervening with this work. We also do testimonial data, which I'm going to spend some time going over towards the end. I think, this is my personal bias, I think testimonial data is one of the richest and most necessary components of doing social impact work. It is testimony directly from the communities that are most impacted. Michael shared this, and Hital shared this too, about the communities that are most affected also have the solutions to these global, implications of violence. They know what they need. We know what we need. Survivors are in spaces to really identify, what kind of structural and infrastructural supports are necessary to really have comprehensive approaches to gender-based violence and systematic violence, including colonialism and white supremacy. That testimonial data is what we'll get into in just a bit. Quantitative data, as I said, we work with several cross-sector folks that are engaged with gender-based violence prevention, including Emerge and Goodwill Youth Re-Engagement Centers and Boys to Men Tucson. So it becomes really critical to start looking at numbers, who's attending these forums, who's responding to these seminar attempts that we've had. We had a launch last year at a theater space here to really get folks invested. We had high level stakeholders, some superintendents, some county judges. We had folks from the juvenile justice courts. What does it mean to get folks in these seats? Who's at the table? Using these numbers to really solidify the ways that we can approach this work. And then again, the qualitative assessment of survey questions with impact management team at SOPAC. We work with them. I actually was onboarded in November of 2021. So I've been working with some folks at SOPAC to really get an accurate assessment of our work. We are bringing tons of bias into the ways that we engage with data collection. We have our questions that we want to ask on behalf of the initiative and get this 5-year implementation plan down, but we really need to also know how to engage with data collection in a way that's responsible, effective, and authentic. Are we assessing qualitative data that's not relevant to the learning objectives of the initiative? Are we not using data to its most efficient means? Are we using this data to impact and bring to policy level changes and using it as a measurable approach to intervening with this work? So this includes like expanding the HIM programming, healthy masculinity programming, disrupting policies that exacerbate harm for men and boys, and how are we getting testimony from the lives of these people who are experiencing and enacting violence to use it to inform the ways that the Healthy Intergenerational Masculinity Initiative moves within this geographical space and nationally. You can go to the next slide, Michael. So I was sharing with our collaborators here at SOPAC that one of the most challenging things for me and Michael and just our core collaborators is making sure that we are approaching this in a way that is equitable and is not gatekeeping. Tons of us have institutional experience. We've worked at institutions, we've worked in academia, and a lot of the times when we're generating these huge data points that we're then kind of reducing into these numerical metrics and measuring these growth analyses that we're conducting, it's not accessible to people, the people that we love, the people that we serve, the youth that we connect with every day. And so I wanted to add this All About Love quote by Bell Hooks, just because we do use really a feminist praxis when we're engaging with disrupting models of disrupting gender-based violence and creating accountability models. But Bell Hooks says, definitions are vital starting points for the imagination. What we cannot imagine cannot come into being. A good definition marks our starting point and lets us know where we want to end up. So what this means for me when having these approaches to multi-tiered data is that we need to be able to tell a story and reiterate the story of the folks that we're assessing and getting data from in a way that is comprehensible and digestible to community, but can also be used to leverage funding opportunities. We want to create spaces when we're engaging with community investment, engaging with funders, that's not just this abstract theoretical data, that lives in a cloud that isn't someone's real life experience that we're putting on paper. So it became really important in this initiative over the last year and a half to not just have these theoretical subsets of data, but make them meaningful, bring them to life. And SOPACT really helped us create language around this data that was meaningful and digestible. It also opens up the realm for us to be in deeper cross-sector partnerships with folks that are in public health sectors. We framed, and Michael did earlier, but toxic masculinity is a public health issue. It impacts all realms of our reality. We've seen a massive increase in gun violence. We've seen massive expulsions. We've seen massive suspensions. We've seen, and I saw someone in the chat was talking about COVID exacerbating the ways that people are outletting, violence and frustration and rage and despair. And so those are all ways that we need to use data and data points to really iterate the message that healthy masculinity is an issue that should be addressed at an institutional level, but also interpersonally, and then this ecological model of accountability amongst peers, amongst friend groups, amongst cross collaborations of communities that are working together to tackle these issues. Michael, you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to take some time to let us just read over this. This is also from our year one impact report with SOPACT, but it is one of the highlights in my experience of what this work means to me. It's what makes my soul sing. It's just a way to really get testimony from the lives of people who are experiencing the transformative power of this work. As Michael mentioned, these surveys that we conduct and the ways that we're engaging with data collection, there's an array. So we do like circle interventions, we do post and pre-surveys, we do statements, we do a feedback loop that's with the internal members of the HIM initiative. We really want to use data in a way that highlights our work, not only internally as we build this work from our collaborative network, but also how we show up in the community. So using this youth testimonial data, which is in our report, to really support our programmatic interventions and highlight this work with school partners. Oftentimes, school partners are not going to read a comprehensive report that has like subset data. It's not always exciting. And I'm just going to keep it 100 with y'all. It's not always exciting work, but it's critical. So it's really important for us to leverage these partnerships with youth-serving organizations and service providers by making this digestible. If I come to a program and I'm trying to prove the efficacy and value of doing healthy intergenerational masculinity work, I'm going to share these parts of our data, right? Having someone share, I have a lot of people that have my back and a lot of people that trust me, and that I have a lot of people that love me, and this came from a 12-year-old who's identifying that they're able to validate pain, they're able to validate empathy, they're able to have this internal self-assessment tool of being responsible, right? Being a responsible community partner, community member, brother, sibling, person, ally, especially as we engage with healthy support interventions. The other thing that this youth testimony does is it brings to attention what structural supports and interventions support our work and make this work valid. How do we recreate and amplify these spaces? So when we're engaging in years 2, 3, and 4 of the initiative, we're able to see, we got excellent testimonial data from this. There was qualitative data, there was people showing up. We were able to quantify the function of this space. And validate the function of this space. So we're going to bring it back, whether it's a community circle, a race-based like cultural competence model where we're using Black affinity spaces to really highlight the ways that Black community members in Tucson rely on each other and build networks, whether it is inviting school partners to something that we're doing. This testimony really, really amplifies the power of transformative data. Michael, you can go to the next slide. This is the last slide that I want to go over, and I really love problematizing data. Over the last year with SOPACT, as I mentioned, we were really looking at what we were assessing and how it supports the outcomes of our initiative. So as Michael mentioned, we had those targeted outcomes, which just included increasing BIPOC adult male stakeholders, policy change, right? Looking at policies, including school policies, district policies, juvenile justice, state level policies that exacerbate harm for men and boys, and then increasing program accessibility, whether that's community accessibility to healthy masculinity programming or it's institutional accessibility. Are we having trainings at the institutional level for folks engaged with violent prevention work? So I wanted to bring an actual survey question that we had, and I worked with an internal team at Boys Tim in Tucson to really look at this one question. This is one question and a subset of data of like 50 questions that exist across mentor, community partners, youth stakeholders that are in these participation circles, and then external collaborators. The question is, how often do you get in trouble for using violence at school or at home? And then there was not a Likert scale answer. There was not a short text box. There was not, a paragraph space. There were these 4 kind of areas of how they could respond. Never, not very often, often, and very often. And so I challenge us in this space to really engage with the chat. I'm going to stop talking in a moment, but I want to problematize this question. What I ask is, how could we make this survey question more targeted and specific? What information could make this question more measurable? And then I want you to think all the way back to when Michael first talked about that ecological framework for addressing men's violence. It's those internalized beliefs that are happening in the home from your primary community, that secondary community, whether it's a school community where you're hearing ideas, beliefs, getting stereotypes reaffirmed, this larger national community, what ideologies are we getting indoctrinated about manhood and masculinity at a national level, including ways that we see violence portrayed. And then this global scale, I see folks tapping in from all over the world. Notions of masculinity exist cross-culturally. So how could we make this question more targeted and specific? Let's talk about it in the chat. Let's talk about it. How often do you get in trouble for using violence at school or at home? I see Danielle sharing, the question is too broad, needs to be more specific on what getting in trouble means, because it could be getting yelled at by a teacher all the way through suspension. Absolutely. How often does violence get what you need, right? Coming from Lesotho, the culture also contribute to this as we raise boys, teaching them what they are the head of the household, which is wrong. Ooh, Anna Velus Wilkin said, provide more of a definition of what violence means. How are we bringing our own personal biases into this, right? How am I defining violence? Is violence direct impact? Is it physical violence? Is it physiological violence? Is it telling someone to shut up and stop crying? Is it institutional violence? Did that student not have anything to eat before they came to school? It's resource violence. They're unhoused. They experienced harassment before they got to school, and now they're acting out of it. How are we defining violence as a measurable aspect of this work? How often do you feel that violence needed to solve a problem at school or at home? Okay, thank you, Ricky. It is confusing, too many aspects in one question, right? We're talking about their experiences at home, their experiences at school. And then Sue shares, if you have violence at home from your father, a son would not have any recognition that they're being violent Yes. Okay. So this is so great. So, I mean, that's not great itself. That's a terrible thing. But learning to talk about cognitive bias, right? If someone is steeped in the conditions of home violence and it's a normal part of their human experience, and they come to school and they're experiencing similar violence, whether it's psychological or at the hands of an institution or punitive, how are they able to discern what violence is? Right. So, what are we defining as violence, and how are we helping them come into a self assessment of what violence is? The relativity of the question, right? Um, so I wanted to have this quick kind of engagement because we wanted to talk about the ambiguity of data and data collection when we're assessing these massive amounts of perceptions and personal experiences related to men's violence. Ambiguity affects compromises folks' ability to make decisions because they don't have enough information. So if we're assessing for something very specifically, we need to get really specific in the questions we're asking with defining violence as either aggression or socio-emotional violence or institutional violence. Thanks, folks, that the question is based in punishment, not self-accountability, right? Like, how is the person engaging with their own actions of violence or how they're perceiving violence? Thanks for that. Yeah, thanks so much, y'all. So that's all that I have for now. We will work with SOPAC in the next year to really get specific on these measurable outcomes of our work. The data collection is unending, and I'm really grateful to be able to connect with folks and talk about building specific metrics that help support our work, especially as we engage with more policy-oriented work in year 2. Our contact information is here. I dropped in there also our website, which has our impact report ready for download as a PDF. We also have an IG HIM initiative. I know it's a lot of vowels together, but we'll get there. And so my contact information is there as director, and then Michael, who serves as kind of as a co-pilot to this work with Brasher Consulting, his contact information is there. Thanks so much, y'all. And I think we'll open it up for questions, and Hito and Michael, other moderators, if there's other things, I'm glad to support.
What a great presentation, Mariah and Michael. I think I'm seeing so much emotion actually. Like I'm like can't even stop reading, different people saying something about how this opened up some new things and how relevant, and a lot of people are actually sharing some of their experiences and I think their work, and amazing. Actually, looks like every time I talk to you guys, I think I learned something new. So this is great. I think there are a lot of questions that Michael has been very diligently answering them. I think I see, Michael, you can actually talk about them. I think everyone can kind of look at that, but I see a lot of questions about this data. And I think, Mariah, you did kind of talk about a great kind of opening up how some of the biases kind of adds into the way we ask the question without defining. And that's why I think my quick 2 cents will be that triangulating the data, right? That same question can be asked to different people, and you may have a different perceptions, and how to kind of put multiple things together to be able to understand whether kids really understand what the violence is, what are we talking about when we say violence, and then I think making the judgment. So Michael, I think go ahead. I think you answer a few questions, I think, about the data collection, and that would be great for people to hear about that.
Yeah, there was 2 questions that came that I just wanted to address. Rebecca asked about our testimonials. So in kind of the process for these specific testimonials. So I'm just going to read a piece here, right? So this is a specific piece of programming. We do call it a challenge adventure weekend. So we'll take, say, 20 teenage boys, 30 to 40 adult men out into the total wilderness for 3 days. It's a heck of an undertaking. We do it a couple times a year, and just do very intensive work of practicing vulnerability, of going through our experiences and our traumas and opening up and asking for support, and really trying to get clear about what's important to me, what do I want in my life, and what do I need to get there. And in that strong container of that many adult men supporting and loving these boys to go through that process, it's really powerful. And so what this says is Challenge Adventure weekends are programmatic interventions. It's kind of a little bit of descriptions. Participants shared post-program testimony of the impact of this particular program. So there's two ways that we get this data, Rebecca. One, we send them out a survey afterwards. And it's through Impact Cloud here with SOPACT. And we have a series of questions where we ask them to rank kind of the accessibility, what it did well, what it can improve, just give us feedback on the program. And then we just give them open dialogue boxes where they can kind of share other things they want to know. And so a lot of this comes from where they're asked to rank what the weekend did well, but then a chance to follow up as well as just open comments. The one other thing I'll say is we do a pre and post video with the boys as well when they arrive there, kind of, what do you hope to get out of this? What are you excited about? Are you nervous about anything? And then we do that when they're leaving. And so that's where we get a lot of that. The one other question I want to say real quick, then I'm going to let some other folks talk, is somebody asked about the budget process. And I actually really, I appreciate that question and want to talk about it. You know, I feel like for those of us in nonprofit leadership, it's always a question of like, well, funders, you know, convincing them that it's important for them to pay for this. And when I started at Boys to Men, we had a tiny budget. And even when I first began this process with SOPACT, you know, it was a stretch. It was a reach for me. And what I did is I actually did a big survey where I looked at all the different organizations really around the world that are doing impact management. And shout out to SOPACT, because I did comprehensive research. And when I found what SOPACT was doing, for me, I was like, there's nobody else. This is it. This is the tip of the spear in impact management. It's what I was looking for. And I only found one organization doing it, and that was SOPACT. And so I took that back to our major funder, the David and Laura Lovell Foundation. And basically I told them, hey, what we've got budgeted right now, what you're funding in this, they're investing $1 million over 5 years into a healthy masculinity initiative. And I said, what we've got budgeted for data and evaluation, unfortunately, we're about to get what we pay for if we don't make a change. And I really just shared the case. You know, I shared the research I had done on the field. I shared resources from SOPACT and just said, you know, we're going to be able to be so much more, not only accountable, but responsive. We're going to be able to do such a higher quality of work if you as the funder will invest, help us to reallocate and add in some money to be able to afford this. And part of what I did is I said, hey, I'll go out here and I'll raise this portion extra just in my own role as Boys to Men. And then we want y'all to fill the rest. And we feel like that's a reasonable ask for what it's going to do for our ability to be successful and accountable. And when I made that case, the funders were like, that was a no-brainer for them. So just wanted to share that process.
I also want to share on that, Michael, too, that leveraging institutional partnerships with folks already committed to gender-based violence prevention, including like our partnership with the Southwest Institute for Research on Women, our partnerships with the Consortium on Gender-Based Violence at the University of Arizona, having folks who are at that high level qualitative research component, who are writing theses and who are engaging with this super complex gap analysis to engage with this work, really set the platform, the foundations for this work as well. That's super helpful to have allied institutional partners.
Is it too much for me to keep responding to questions?
No, not at all, actually. You know, like I think we were saying earlier, we keep our forum open, and I think some people do have a lot of questions. So as long as you have, you know, a bandwidth, I definitely do.
Okay. There was a few that I felt like I could speak to relatively quickly.
Yes.
Somebody said, did we also get responses on violence against boys or men from women and girls? That's a pretty common question. You know, just to be really straightforward, that is an issue. It does happen. What I can understand and what the statistics bear out is that boys and men are not being made homeless, dying, suffering from a pandemic of sexual assault because of women's violence against men. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean it's not anything. But when we're talking about a large scale public crisis, that's not our field. We're not working on that. In fact, what I believe a lot of research shows is women and girls that use violence in relationships with men are are usually survivors themselves, and the violence has a totally different function. So no, that's not the field we work in. That's not the field that this works on. And I guess the other one I was just gonna answer. Well, does the activity also include psychosocial support to the survivors or victims? Emerge Center Against Domestic Abuse, one of our core partners, that's their entire operation. That's everything they do. It's kind of outside of the scope per se of this initiative, which is really focused on intergenerational masculinity. But it is a major part of the work that's going on in this community and attached to what we're doing. And then the last one, did the research attract the policymakers for discussion? So what I'll say, I'd say we're 2 years into this. And when you're talking about upstream work, this is a big long-term project. We actually, what was it, Mariah, in August, we did the public launch for this initiative. It's first kind of like, we're ready, we're unveiling this thing. And we did attract a lot of policymakers there. We're doing work with policymakers at our largest school districts. We're beginning to work with some of our relationships with judges and juvenile court. But I would say the policy work is going to be the longest term work. We're still at kind of a point where we are building just relationships and trust with folks, but there is buy-in, they're listening. But I would say, we're a couple years away from really being able to move the needle about the policies that are really relevant to what we're intervening on here.
Excellent. Actually, there's so many questions, and I think I just want to remind everyone, Mariah does have a hard stop, and I think feel free to kind of send your questions to us through the emails, and I'll forward them to both of them, and you will find them on a LinkedIn. Do get connected, and I think I'll be also sharing the report that they were talking about, and I think you can actually kind of have any questions on this data. Data is actually, it took us a long while, right, to kind of understand where we are today. So it's not an easy journey. And I think Michael definitely took a very bold step. I think when he said that we were a stretch for them, and I feel his pain. And actually, I wish that more and more organizations kind of take this data seriously to kind of understand their programs to do better, not to just report. And I think that is what SOPAC stands has been. So thank you so much, both of you, for being here. And actually, I really think that this was an amazing, enlightening session for many of our actually followers. So thank you for joining today. And thank you, both of you, for making time. See you then.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Chat soon. Thank you.
Bye now.